Hola, and hello everyone. Welcome to my presentation. I'm going to talk about mapping and cartography in Tableau. So for the people in the room here, how many of you are Tableau users? Good, a lot of you. How many of you are just starting out in Tableau, just trying to get the basics? So a couple, then the rest of you are advanced users. All right. So you might pick up some things. If you're an advanced user, hopefully you can pick up on some fundamental geography basics here. And for those of you who are new to Tableau, hopefully these are a few tricks that you can use that I use on a regular basis. So it's not exactly a tutorial on mapping and doing cartography in Tableau, but it's more of a best practices or really just things that I do that I find useful. So why am I qualified to talk about this? Well, I am a data scientist for the Institute for Health and Business Insight at Central Michigan University. My background is in geography, and I kind of fell into the role of doing data visualization. So that's how I started using Tableau. I'm also a geography instructor at Northwestern Michigan College in Traverse City. So whenever I do any geography course that I teach, I start out with this exercise. I ask the students, say this is a Geography 101 thing, but I do it 109, 108, whatever course I'm teaching. I ask them to make a mental map. So I give everyone 5 minutes. In this case, I ask them to make a map from the NMC campus in Traverse City to the Grand Traverse Mall. And I say, you're making this map to hand to someone who has no idea how to get from campus to the mall. And so you want to include any details you think are relevant and useful and will get them there and not lost. So I say not to worry about artistic quality because that's not necessarily important. But what I'm really looking for are just the kind of map elements that they include when they make their map. So here's my map. This is not fair because I came up with this idea for the students, so it wasn't sprung on me. So I was able to spend my 5 minutes putting everything into the map that I know should be on a map. I have a north arrow, a legend. I put some extra features on here so if they pass a certain point where they were supposed to turn, they can say, I'm at the airport, I should turn around, go towards the mall. I put a title on there. I say the map is not to scale. These are just some fundamental map elements that you want to include when you're making any sort of geographic representation. So good maps include some of these elements. Now, I'm saying good maps. It doesn't mean that a map has to have all of these elements, but they are important, and some are even more important than others. This is not really a good map, I don't think, but it includes all of the elements here. So let me go through these one by one and explain why they're important. First of all, good maps have titles. And with each one of these things, I'm going to explain, can you do this in Tableau? Can you put a title on your map in Tableau? Of course, and you should have a title. A description of your map. Another one, of course. You can add a description to a map in Tableau or any visualization, and you should have that to explain to the user what they're looking at. A map scale. No, you can't do this in Tableau. I think David left. There was someone that works for Tableau that was here. Oh, in the back. You should put map scales in Tableau so people know how far of a distance they're looking at.
I think you can now, actually.
Is this a new thing?
2018-2.
2018-2, so maybe I'm a version behind. Nice job. You got the map scales in there. Actually, yeah, I'm going to call you out a few times on this. There's more things that... I love Tableau, I work with Tableau, but I don't work for Tableau, so I have some minor gripes or suggestions to make. Map scale, great. So if this is available now, then you can use it. It's not necessarily important. If you're showing a map of the entire United States, if you're making a map of Argentina, you may not need a map scale there. But if you have something that's more zoomed in, maybe you're just looking at a city, points within a specific city, could be helpful to have a map scale. An inlay is nice, but not always necessary. Again, if you're doing a map of a city, you might want to have an inlay of the region that the city's in. Maybe you're using a map of Grand Rapids with specific points on it. The inlay could be a map of Michigan or Southwest Michigan. So to do this in Tableau, you would simply just add another sheet with the map and just have it smaller on your map dashboard. A legend, you can certainly do a legend, and there's a few ways you can do this. You can copy the legends that are just provided in Tableau, or you can make additional sheets like point graphs or different types of graphs to use interactive legends. So you can point and click on certain elements of that and see where they highlight on the map. A north arrow is always useful. This one's really easy to do in Tableau because all of the maps point to north always. North is always up on the maps. You can't change the orientation. So it'd be easy to add a north arrow image. Author, sure, sometimes you want to have the author on there. Maybe it's not necessary, but it could be good to have. And then finally, information on the map projection or the grid. This is something that's a fundamental concept in geography that you may not need to include on a map in Tableau, but it's at least a good concept to understand. And let me illustrate that, show you a quick point. This is the map that Tableau has. Just took a quick snapshot of a map showing population. This is called the Mercator Projection. So this is taking, a projection is how you take the globe, a round surface, a three-dimensional surface, and you flatten it out onto a two-dimensional surface. There's different ways of doing this, and with each way of doing it, you have different levels of distortion. So what I would point out here is the size of Greenland and the size of Australia. These are two completely different sized countries. When you look at it on this map, that's really apparent, but not in the way that it actually is represented. This is what Greenland looks like overlaid on Australia. It fits into Australia 3.5 times. So again, not important to put the map projection on the map, but to be aware that the maps in Tableau are this Mercator projection. And anything that you have that's closer to a pole, the north or south pole, will be more stretched out and distorted, so their shapes will look bigger. These are two different types of projections. Here's another suggestion for Tableau. Maybe we could change to a different type of projection. This is the Mullowide projection. This one preserves the area of a country or the area of something, but it does distort the shape a little bit. It would be nice to have some different options there. Just throwing it out there. My number one tip with Tableau, and this applies not only to maps, but to every visualization you make in Tableau, is to just change the defaults. The default maps in Tableau are fine, and they can be useful if you're just looking for some quick analysis or you want to make a quick map to examine a certain variable. But really simple, easy changes can make your maps look so much better. The default color scheme for a Tableau map is green with 80% transparency. I don't know how this was selected. Someone must have determined this was the best look for a default, but I think it can be improved on with just a few small steps. So first, I always adjust the transparency of my maps to 100%. I don't know why they're 80%. Maybe it's because you want to see the map background, but the map background isn't always necessary. So the first step I do is I change my color to 100%. That's using the transparency bar. Second thing I do is I remove the border if it's not necessary to show. If you were showing a map of zip codes of Michigan, you might not want to have a border on there because it would just look like a jumbled mess with all the different borders. So if I'm showing something at a high level of granularity, oftentimes I'll just completely remove the border. Second thing I do, and this is another optional thing, sometimes I just turn off the map background. If I have an element of my dashboard showing a specific state, a specific area, if it's obvious that it's Michigan, then you might not need the other states and the other maps around it. You don't need to see Ohio, or you don't need to see Canada or the lakes. You know this is Michigan. You just don't need any other additional map elements to clutter it. So with those three changes I made, that's the default map of Michigan by zip code, and that's the adjusted one. I think this looks more attractive. It could fit your purpose more, and it's very easy to change and make. The next thing to be mindful with mapping in Tableau or mapping in any sort of software is to be mindful of making proxy maps. And this is especially relevant with population data. So there are a lot of data variables that you might look at that directly correlate with population. And if you show those on a map, you're getting a map of population by showing a different variable. Here's a map, just some fake data here. Customers reached. Here's a map of population. And here's a map of the two combined. This might be fine. This might be what you're trying to show. If you just want to see the number of customers reached or the raw value of something, you could show it in this way, but be mindful that it's the same as population. If you wanted to adjust this to account for population, the source that I always go to is the United States Census Bureau if I'm working with information from the US. There's also other sources of census data from other countries, but this is the one I'm most familiar with and use on a regular basis. If you go to the American Fact Finder, Advanced Search, and you look by geography, you have all these different levels of geography that you can download data at. Population data, socioeconomic data, sometimes there's business data. Different levels of geography at the census have different amounts of data with them. But it's a good source if you haven't used it before, just to sort of flip through and see if there's anything that might be applicable to what you're trying to show, or data you can use here to adjust the numbers of the map you're trying to make.
Hey, Joe?
Yes?
I don't know if you know, is there any way, because Tableau has a lot of that census data inside of it for their mapping, you can select. Do you happen to know if there's any way to create a calculated field? Like if I had something I wanted to normalize up, I had the data already in Tableau, how to call that?
No.
The field? Yeah,
I don't think you can.
I was looking online, I couldn't find anything to try to do that.
So what Nolan is saying is that he's asking if you can use the background maps in Tableau. They do provide maps that show, for instance, the 2016 median household income or the 2016 population by county or zip code. Those can be nice in and of themselves. I found that it's hard to use those with other mapping data on top of that to make it look and blend well. And as far as I'm aware, you can't extract that data. But a good option would be to just draw whatever you could from the Census Bureau or some other sources. The other thing, there's the other side with population. Does anyone know what this map is? Voting, presidential election? Yes, this is the 2016 presidential election showing counties won by Trump and counties won by Clinton. The ones that were won by Trump are in red, the ones that were won by Clinton are in blue. When you look at this map, it looks overwhelmingly like there were way more votes for Trump. And the reason is this is a map by county. Not all counties have the same population, and therefore this data isn't quite representing the whole picture. If you were to bring in the percentage of votes, you would have a much different looking map. So now this is more how much Clinton or how much Trump that particular county voted for, and you get more of a blend of purples with some blues and some reds. Additionally, you can't do this in Tableau right now, but I think this is something that Tableau could do. There are ways that you can create this type of map using false geographic data. For instance, just using squares of basic representations of states. But what this map does, a cartogram, it's a type of map that changes the shape of a geographic area based on a particular variable. So now this one is taking those same results we saw in the last two maps and adjusting the size by population. And now when you look at this map, it does look a lot more spread out, a lot more even. Those cities like Detroit, Los Angeles, Miami, where there are many more people, you see much more red filled out in the geographic space. So don't just make a population map, but additionally, if you do adjust for population, you have to watch out for your scales. These are two maps again showing customers reached, and the map on the right is % of customers reached. Yes?
Let me go back to the previous map. I've seen this map before, and when I've looked at it, I've wondered, I mean, I thought the race was roughly 50-50
Right.
an outcome. That actually looks more like Clinton had a higher percentage of the votes. And I'm just wondering, is there something about the way they make that kind of cartogram that actually comes out that way, or is it really 50-50 and I'm just deceived by my eyes?
I wonder if some of that, if that's by population, then it's going to give urban areas more area.
So if this is a true cartogram that used population, if this is a correctly assembled cartogram, then this should be the true representation. The size is based off population.
And so urban areas are going to have larger population, and it was the urban areas that were more tending to be blue.
Right, that's why those urban areas, heavily populated areas are much bigger on this map, a lot more obvious to see. I mean, if you look at the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, it's hardly visible. The population is so small, but it also is overwhelmingly red. It's not really represented on this type of map. So again, you can't make this map specifically in Tableau, but this is called a cartogram, and there are other ways to make that. If you Google it and look it up, you might be able to find a creative way to make something like this. So back to the scale. On the left, we have the customers reached. On the right, we have the % of customers reached. If you look at these two counties, this is Kent County, the one that we're currently in with Grand Rapids, and this is Clare County in a more rural part of Michigan. Kent County, customers reached 60, potential customers 60, so this is 100% saturation of this area. Clare County, one customer reached out of the potential customers, 100% of the customers reached in that county. Now on these maps, they look the same. They're both the dark blue, the darkest blue. But really, this could be, again, this could be what you're trying to show, but it's good to be aware that it might be a little bit misreading or misleading for your map reader to see something like this. Another thing with Tableau is to, again, not just with maps, but also with any visualization, is to keep your scales consistent. If you're comparing multiple maps, you have to make sure that the two scales are consistent. So the map on the left and the map on the right are from different years. The map on the left is from 2010. The map on the right is from 2015. These scales were auto-generated by Tableau. So I made these in two different sheets, and I set the scale color to be the same, and they appear to be almost identical. The problem is the map on the left has a scale of 100 to 200. The map on the right has a scale of 157 to 296. So if you are going to compare different visualizations, particularly maps, it's important to keep a fixed scale, to change your scale to include the minimum and the maximum of the two maps or the two visuals. When I do this, we have a completely different picture of what the numbers look like. Whoops. Yep. So now it's a 100 to 300 scale, the minimum value, the maximum value, and it's very clear that there's a difference between the 2 years. Choosing the right color scheme is important. This is just a basic fundamental thing in cartography. There's 3 types of color schemes available in Tableau right now. There is a sequential color scheme. This is where it's ordered from high to low. So you use this color scheme in a map that's showing different values. You have a diverging color scheme. This is useful also for a map that shows difference in values, but specifically when you have negative and positive values. Or you have, they could be negative and positive values, or they could be good, bad values, some representation of that. And then in a qualitative map, this is where you're just using different colors to represent different things. So this is an example of a quantitative map, U.S. population density by county. You want to have a sequential scale here, darks indicating higher values, lights indicating lower values. And then this will be a qualitative map. So this map's just showing different colors for different climate zones in the U.S. another thing, I went out of order here a little bit. Another thing to keep in mind is that not everyone can read maps the same way. Specifically, people who are colorblind have great difficulty reading maps or any colored visual in Tableau in general. And I have worked with people who are colorblind, and this was something that was constantly on my mind. I had to make sure if I'm using a map that shows multiple colors that it's accessible for everyone to see. And I would recommend checking out this site, colorbrewer2.org. They show some of the best practices for the number of classes that you're using for color schemes, as well as colors that print out well on black and white and that are accessible for people who are colorblind.
Hey, Joe.
Yes?
Just a quick little nugget here. Starting in version 10 with Tableau, we actually changed from a red-green default color matrix to a blue-orange.
To a blue-orange, right, so you can show the opposites.
Your color scheme up there had the blue-orange, right, bottom left, lower, or top left, lower right.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think that was a good move by Tableau to do that. So now it should still be a consideration. Don't assume it's always right, but it's good that Tableau is defaulting to that where you can really tell the differences between light and dark colors.
I just want to protest that Calvin College's regular use of blue and orange does not represent affinity for both colors. It's just colorblind.
That's unfortunate that they're using that. Should have something like this instead. And also, I should note that this was put together, these different color schemes were put together by a professional cartographer who has studies to back up why she chose the colors that she did. So these are considered best practices colors for whichever color scheme you want and for whatever number of classes you're trying to show. There's one thing that I do with Tableau. Sometimes I have interactive maps, and sometimes I have static maps. When you think of Tableau, you think of the ability to interact with visuals, to point and click and use filters to change what you're showing. And that's great. That's a fundamental part of Tableau. But it's also good just for making static maps, pulling them out of Tableau and using them on some slides or something if you don't have the ability for the user to interact with it. So when I'm making interactive maps, just a few keynotes here. I try not to crowd it with a lot of quick filters and options because that can quickly become confusing for the user. Specifically, you have to be aware not to use filtering options that actually conflict with each other and misrepresent what you're showing on the map. If you have a parameter filter where you can change the type of geography and you've blended your data in such a way that you have a value for one geography that doesn't translate to the other geography, if you have all these filtering options on here, the user can misrepresent the values that are being shown on the specific geography. So that's just an important thing to be aware of, maps, any visuals. And I just try to keep it as simple as possible with the maps. This is my personal opinion. This by no means that you have to be simple with it. But I've just found that it's more effective for users to have a nice, clean, simple map with some of those elements that I discussed earlier. A title, a north arrow, really make it look like it was produced in some sort of GIS software, some sort of mapping-specific software. Oh, and the last point here, you should always question if a map is even necessary. And from someone who comes from a geography background, and I make maps, this is a hard thing, it's a hard pill for me to swallow, but it's really the truth. Just because you have something that's geographic, that has some sort of geographic tie to it, doesn't mean that making a map is the most effective way of doing it. Sometimes just a simple list or a bar chart or any other visual you can do in Tableau is just as effective or even more effective. So always consider if you even need a map. Now with the static maps, I do a few things here. Again, I just focus on a clean design, but that's my general approach to any sort of cartography. You need to make sure that it's easily interpretable for your audience. If they're not able to interact with this, if they're only working with a snapshot of a map, you need to make sure that you have all the information there that allows them to understand what you're showing. And you want to remove any legends or any Tableau-specific items that you wouldn't want to include on a slide or on a static image. So what I do is I will screen capture different parts of a Tableau dashboard, and then I'll use something like Photoshop to put them together in a nice way, maybe add a completely different background, add some text on the side, and make it look like a dashboard, but completely static and put together outside of Tableau. One quick way you can do this is to export the image. You can export different elements from Tableau. You do have the ability to export maps and images out of Tableau, but it's a little bit clunky by default. It will end up looking like this if you don't turn off some of the options. So you have the scale here on the side, or the legend on the side. It always has a description or a caption on the bottom. But in this case, in this particular case, maybe I just want the map. So I'll just export the view, crop it, and then I can add whatever I want to the sides. Same thing goes with the legend. You can't export the legend specifically, but you can always just take a screenshot of this. Maybe you just want the bar and you want to change the look around it, or you can screenshot that whole thing and include it onto your map space. This is getting into a little bit more advanced GIS talk, some advanced mapping techniques. But one of my favorite things that Tableau has added, and something that I was really pushing for a long time, is the integration of reading spatial files, specifically shape files, but there are more formats available. A shape file is there's a program called Esri ArcMap, and this is a specific spatial file format for that program, but Tableau is able to read those in. The reason I mentioned shapefile specifically is they are by far the most common form of spatial data available. And you can find shapefiles in all shapes and forms. If you just do a quick Google search, shapefile of XYZ, whatever you're looking for, a lot of times you'll be able to find exactly what you need. But two sources that I go to most common are, again, the Census Bureau's Tiger files. These are files that include every kind of political boundary in the US, along with roads and some water features and some physical boundaries. So this map here is using the Tiger file highway system classification shapefile. And you can even get every single road and completely cover this map if you want. Or you can bring in the shapefile, filter in the specific types of roads and highways that you would like this map here. Another one is Esri's Data and Maps. They're the file format that shapefiles are made in, and they have a lot of freely available data that you can use. A common thing that I work with clients and I do on my own is doing geocoding for them. And geocoding, if you're not aware, it's taking address data or taking some sort of data that specifies a specific location and putting latitude, longitude to it. So you can do this in GIS software, but it's either very complicated and you need to have a lot of back-end infrastructure in place, like every road system, in order to do that, or you can try to find some freely available ways of doing geocoding. So here's a list of addresses in Kalamazoo. If you were going to show this in Tableau, the best level of granularity you have is city. It can't take the address specifically, but you have Kalamazoo, so you can put the city in there. If you had zip code, you could also use that. I'm not aware, are there more than one zip code in Kalamazoo? Yes. So if that's the case, you might see a few points here, but you're not capturing all your data. The other limitation to using city as a pre-geocoded point in Tableau is that it will only map to cities where you have the city, the state, and if that city has a population over 15,000. So there used to be some sites like this. If you Google batch geocode, There were all sorts of sites where you could just drop in your addresses and it would spit out the latitude, longitude. There's since been a bit of a crackdown on this. I think that people were using it a bit too much, and it was overloading some of these pet project batch geocoders that people had put together. So now there are still some available. They seem to come and go. Occasionally you need to acquire an API key in order to fetch a certain amount of records. So if you had, let's say, 30,000 points and you have a 10,000 point limit on an API key, you might want to put a portion of your data in Google, a portion of it into MapQuest, and a portion of it into Bing. And that way you can at least accomplish some of your geocoding, or maybe all of it if you have a limited number of points. Another option with some basic geocoding is to drop the address data into Google Sheets. If you have a Google account, you have Google Sheets, and there's an add-on feature called Mapping Sheets right up there. So you have to add it as an add-on, but once you have that option, you're able to just use the address data, and it will plot out those points for you and give you the XY location, the latitude, longitude. So here were the maps. These are, I made this for a friend of mine in Omaha for a geography class. I copied all this data from Wikipedia. I just put it into the spreadsheet. It had some addresses already there. I told it to map it out, and this is what I ended up with. So this is cool if you just want to make a map of it. But let's say now that you want to take this data and put it into Tableau. You can do that by exporting the KML from that. So I guess I don't have a picture of that specifically. So when you have different shapes here, you have an option in your map where you can export the entire map as an image, where you can print it, and where you can export a KML or a KMZ. Those are Google spatial file formats. Tableau is able to read KMLs. So if you did want these points, you export as a KML, and they can be read directly into Tableau. You can also use something called Google My Maps. It's a little bit hard to navigate to, but again, if you have a Google account, you look for your places, and then you click on My Maps, and then you'll see something that says Google My Maps. And there you can make the three different types of map elements, which are points, lines, and polygons. So this was an assignment I had my students do while I was gone this week. I had, everyone had to make a map using Google My Maps, and they had to make 5 polygons, 5 lines, 10 points, and a set of directions. So this person decided to do the NMC campus, which is actually the example I showed. And this person was the first person to submit their map, so they just copied what I did. Smart move by their point. I think that was a good thing to do. So this student, they made different parking lots on campus. They have kind of the main road that goes into it and a few key points. All of these elements can be exported as a KML and brought into Tableau in a spatial file format. So if you needed to make a map of a campus or of a specific smaller area, you can do something called digitizing, that's the word. So you use the map background, usually the satellite imagery. You look for the feature that you want to have a shape for, and then you just point and click as best as you can, make that shape, and now you have it. Export it as a KML, bring it into Tableau, and you've just created a spatial file format. So this is a great thing to do if you have a lot of time and you need a lot of map features. I would recommend using it.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
You don't have, so the batch geocode was great back in the day, right?
Right.
So let's say you have more than 50 data points, or 50 addresses, and you're looking maybe at 500 or 5,000 addresses. You then have to drop back and go to a paid-for type of GIS product.
Sometimes. The limit is about 10,000 for Google. So going back to this, there is an option here. I guess I don't have it on here. When you're creating this points, if you wanted to create a a layer, which is a set of the different points. You can then import address data or import table data. When you use Google My Maps, it seems to add more points than what you are able to geocode. I'm not going to recommend that until you have checked the user agreement to see if that's something that you're able to do. But I know that you can bring in at least 10,000 points into Google My Maps and then bring those points out. But check the user agreement. Don't break any laws when you're using the free geocoding. Alternately, if your company has money, you can pay to have geocoding outsourced, and they also give you a level of accuracy for it. So if you have really messy address data, they might give you these sets of 100% matches and something where they have 95% confidence it's a match. Yes?
Just thought I'd shout out to your institution, which hosts the multi-site Esri site license.
Yes.
So I was able to use some credits to run through Esri's World Geocoder just a few weeks ago.
Oh, great.
And that is way better than
Yeah.
most.
Right, so some universities have that, and maybe even some organizations have that. What he was just mentioning is Esri. This is the mapping software that's by far the most commonly used GIS software in industry. It's expensive, but it's widely available. And your organization, many of your organizations probably already have it. And they do have some add-on features where if you've already paid for a license, you can use their geocoder at either minimal cost or at a smaller cost than completely outsourcing it with a geocoding specific program or service. So with GIS, I mentioned this a few times before. If you're not familiar, it stands for Geographic Information Systems. Sometimes it stands for Geographic Information Science, depending on how you're using the term. But generally, it's a geographic information system. And that's a system where you can use spatial data and backed with information. I won't talk about each one of these specifically, but these are all things that you can't do these in Tableau currently. But with a little bit of creativity, you could use GIS software to make hotspot analysis or do a site selection algorithm to pick best locations. Maybe just do some spatial statistics. You could use GIS software. You could export your results into a spatial format, and then you could bring that into Tableau and make these same sorts of maps in Tableau without using Tableau to generate the process. As far as GIS software goes, I've already mentioned ArcMap. If you're interested in using GIS and you work for a company or a university or some organization, check to see if you already have this and try it out. That would be your best option. If you don't have it, there's a program called Qgis that's free, it's open source, and it looks almost identical to Esri. And it's actually what I use on a daily basis now. I've shifted away from ArcGIS to in favor of the free and open source software, which I just think is more valuable when I'm teaching geography classes, something that's applicable and usable for the students. So that's it. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. Yes?
Thank you very much for the information. I was able
Sure.
to do a few tidbits here, so that's time well spent.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. One of them, very, very basic, and doesn't necessarily apply just to cartography, but for Tableau. Not everybody has access to this application. And if I create some research or some information that I want to share with somebody else who doesn't have Tableau or doesn't know how to use it, I'm finding it very difficult to take this information and import it either into PowerPoint or any other format and send it to them so they can still experience the interactivity of it when you have multiple maps or when you're just trying to run across a slide bar and see exactly what the changes are. Are you aware of any patch application or anything else that's out there so I can share this information with non-Tableau users out in the community, please?
Yes. So there is a method you can use that is not Tableau specific, but it can replicate the usability of Tableau. And that's using PowerPoint, or the free option would be Google Slides. And specifically, you want to use animations, or I think it's just called animations in both, where you can set a button or a particular shape to change the slide and go somewhere else. If you had your individual shapes if you're able to put those onto an image on a slide and have a different animation for each one of those, the user should be able to click on that and either pop up a visualization or send them to another slide that looks identical to that but has the extra info there. So it looks like they're opening up something like they would in Tableau. It looks like they're opening up a tooltip, but it's really just switching around slides in PowerPoint or Google Slides.
What about Tableau Reader?
Or you can use, if it's not proprietary or confidential information, you could voice code on Tableau Public. That's free to use. So
Yes.
if you have Tableau, you can put it on Tableau Public, and you can, anybody that has a web browser and access to the internet can see what you put out there. But anybody in the world can. You can't just say, I just want these 5 people to look at it.
Well, I did a research, for example, on human trafficking in the state of Michigan, as well as how it compares to the rest of the world.
Mhm.
And for that, looking over like a 16 years worth of data, I had to compile from 4 different databases, trying to show exactly what the progression was from 2000 through 2016 or 2017. How am I going to be able to show that side by side,
So
from country to country or from county to county as I move along, unless it becomes like 32 different slides that they have to click through?
So the question here was, how can you show a change over time using static images? And I would say Ryan had a solution for that. If you were here for his last talk, he used the page option on Tableau, which the page option is if you have dates, you can cycle through years or cycle through months. If you take a snapshot of each one of those images, you can use any sort of online converter and make a GIF image of that, and then embed that onto a slide so it'll cycle through the progression. Just sort of in a loop, but it could accomplish what you're going for.
Lice is the name of the software that Ryan.
Would you spell that, please?
LICECAP, just an open source GIF creator.
Great. Thank you all.
So it still requires a manual work of exporting all of the images, but then you can.
Yep.
Well, so I didn't have to export all the images. You can use the pages shelf in Tableau.
Yes.
Play, and then it'll cycle through all your images, whatever's on your pages shelf. And then I just put LiceCap over the top of that, hit record, and hit play in Tableau, and it recorded that whole sequence.
That's great.
Yeah, so that,
For your input.
Sure.
The second question that I have is still when it comes to naming convention, when you're using geocodes in Tableau,
Mhm.
I found out there are some countries, whether it's North Korea or South Korea, depending how they are
Yeah.
called, or Congo or Democratic Republic of Congo.
Mhm.
Sometimes it doesn't even recognize it, even if I go into Tableau, into the data set, and manually change it to the way that Tableau would want it to be.
Yeah.
I'm having a difficulty. I don't know whether it's just a glitch in the system or it's a user operator issue.
Tableau has built-in geocoding, so they could recognize Michigan as the word Michigan, or they can recognize it as MI. They can't recognize it if you have Michigan spelled wrong with the last 3 letters or something, or MICH wouldn't pick up on there. So there's just a limitation for how much they can incorporate into their built-in geocoding. If you have a case like that, I don't have a great recommendation. If you had some had some advanced skills in something like fuzzy logic, you could set up rules that look for different iterations of that word and run through your list of countries, where if it's spelled like this, or you have 10 different spellings of each country, replace it with this spelling that fits Tableau. That would be the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Joe, an interesting story about that is I was doing a map for India, and Kashmir, with the U.S. locale selected, shows as belonging to Pakistan. And so, I created this infographic for them to look at, and they're like, that map's not right. Kashmir belongs to India.
Oh, no.
And the way to change it in Tableau is there's a locale selector, and if you go to locale and you change it to India instead of the U.S., it switches it and shows Kashmir as belonging to India instead of Pakistan. So
Wow. So you're getting into some real geopolitical issues there. Yeah.
Like 10 cases of product with there. So.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yes?
It might be a disservice to some new people in the room not to double down on Nolan's recommendation of Tableau Public, because not only
Yes.
can you publish to the cloud, as long as your data is not confidential, but the authoring environment's free too. So anybody here can download Tableau Public and start doing this cartography without spending a penny.
Tableau
Tableau's actually even pretty well behaved about the marketing side. So give them your email address
Tableau Public is almost exactly the same with a few limitations. I think the number of records you can bring in is limited to 1 or 2 million or something, and there's a few options that are turned off, but Tableau Public is a great resource if you're looking for a free version of that with data that you don't mind being publicly available.
My concern is the end user.
Mhm.
What is their learning curve? And if I'm just sending this, for example, to an attorney in the state of Michigan, they don't have time to go and figure out how to navigate through this. They just want the information in front of them so they can make decisions, just like most end users.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that because one of the essential map elements is a description of your map. So the description of a map or description of any data visual should include what you're showing, perhaps what the data is, any sort of methodology used in order to generate the look of that. But the description can also include instructions for a user. And that's something that I do commonly with dashboards that we set up, especially when they're very complicated with lots of filters and ways to subset and look at your data. To provide some sort of splash screen with instructions of use, or even just having call-out boxes to specific parts of your dashboard. Maybe you have the tutorial dashboard, and then you have another dashboard that's exactly the same without that tutorial, just to get your users' feet wet and understand how to go about using it. Sure. Mm-hmm.
Another great one is the story mode. So you can actually take a single dashboard and then put it through the story mode and annotate and just walk them through. It's a lot like the PowerPoint option, but they can still interact with every slide.
And story mode is good too because you can change the options and the filters within each individual slide of the story. So instead of having the user click on something specific or you're hoping that they click on something specific, you can set those clicks for them ahead of time and just have them iterate through the slides or the story. All right, thank you all for attending. Thanks, Argentina.